Welcome in, everyone. It is another beautiful Friday. You know what time it is. It is Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I am your host, Britt Flinn. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. While you're there, make sure to like and subscribe. That way, you can catch all of our amazing content as we get closer and closer into the fantasy football playoffs, which I cannot wait for. And I want to thank our producer, Tony LaBarbera, for all of his amazing work that he put into today's show. But before I want to get started, I want to spread a little bit of positivity. And I don't know about you guys, but I have had the best week in sports imaginable. Wednesday night, the Arkansas Razorback basketball team took down Duke. It was the first time they've ever played here in Arkansas. It really made me relive the championship days in the 90s, which again ages me, but whatever, who cares? It was a really fun environment. And then last night, the Dallas Cowboys came back and beat the Seattle Seahawks. And let's get started and talk a little bit about that game. The Cowboys did come back and win 41-35. But it wouldn't be a Cowboys game if there wasn't any drama, right? This was the first game at home all year that they've actually trailed. And they trailed going well into the fourth quarter, which was not something that we expected with a 9-point spread. But there were so many penalties. Pete Carroll even spoke to it after the game, saying that the refs don't need to throw on every little ticky tack penalty that doesn't affect the outcome of the game. And I'm kind of what or of the opinion that, yeah, you do. Because if you don't enforce it one time, then you're not going to enforce it when it really does matter or could matter. So I think he was just a little salty. I'm interested in seeing what you guys think about that. Were there too many penalties or were these teams just being sloppy? So if you have an opinion on that, throw that in the comments. There was also not a single punt in the entire game. This was only the fifth time that had happened in an NFL game. This was an offensive explosion. And I will not lie to you guys. I was a little disappointed as I do have the Dallas defense all over the place. And they weren't able to shut down DK Metcalf whatsoever. He finished with 6 receptions, but for 134 yards and 3 touchdowns. Every time he kept catching the ball, I was just like, what are we going to do? Deron Bland did not have a good night against Metcalf. Some people were saying that he might have hurt his defensive player of the year chances, but he still came up with a critical play in the late part of the game that, I think still keeps him in there, but I may be a little bit biased. Geno Smith also had a great night, 23 of 41 for 334 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Zach Charbonnet had a decent night, 60 yards and 1 touchdown, but I think it could have been better had he not left with that knee injury late in the game. Hopefully everything is okay with him, but we'll have to wait and see about the injury report. If he is out and Kenneth Walker is still dealing with that oblique injury, this is bad, bad news for the Seahawks. Jackson Smith and Jigba finally had a semblance of a breakout game, I guess. 7 receptions for 62 yards. He didn't score a touchdown, but he scored higher than his stat, which is all that I needed. And we'll get into some sleeper picks for this Sunday later. Before I jump into the Cowboys, I want to talk about some of your questions here in the chat. And great to see you, Toronto Dave. Alarm. Let's go, fam. Coop, the outfit is a whole vibe. You know what? This thing is warm and the house is cold. And so it's just a way for me to disguise being really comfy. But I'm glad that you think that it's a vibe. Skinny McKinney, what's up? Great to see you in the chat. First Arkansas win against a ranked ACC team since 95. Yeah, I told you the 95 just dynasty that we had going on in Arkansas basketball was completely amazing. It was great to relive that. They set an attendance record at Bud Walton Arena. Then they stormed the court. Obviously, they don't care. They got the win, so they don't care if they have to pay the fine. Dylan, great to see you in the chat. Would I rather have Stroud or Lamar rest of season? Got an offer to give up Stroud for Lamar and Russell Wilson. Some favorable matchups for Lamar. He's my guy. You're from Baltimore. Yeah, no, I don't think that you should trade. That seems pretty lateral to me. And also, Stroud has a pretty difficult week 15 matchup, I believe it is. And that's the worst time to have a bad matchup. You don't want to hit that bad matchup when you're actually in the playoffs. I think I would hold on to Lamar. And, use your being from Baltimore as the tiebreaker if they say anything. Toronto Dave says, I think the refs were a bit liberal, but to be honest, hard for me to say. Yeah, I can see that sometimes too. It's a matter of opinion sometimes. It confused me a little bit because they didn't throw flags when I thought that they should have, and then threw flags at other times when I thought that they should have just kept them in their pockets. But we can we can deal with it. And yes, Gino did ball. Ann asks, "What's the scoop on McBride, my only tight end?" I believe that he practiced today, so he should be good to go. I don't think it's anything too super serious. And them letting Zach Ertz go, I know he was still on injured reserve, but just tells me that they have complete faith in McBride and this guy. Hoove, what's going on? Um, Great seeing you. And from your outfit and style perspective, I'm very honored. Uh, Super honored that you enjoy the outfit. So let's move on to the Cowboys. And I'll head back to your questions a little bit later. But Dak balled out yet again, guys. What I don't know what happened after the break, after the bye week, but he has been on fire. He was 29 of 41, 299 yards, and three touchdowns. Tony Pollard only went for 68 yards, which is meh, but he did get a touchdown, which is great to see. CeeDee Lamb was unstoppable yet again with 12 receptions, 116 yards, and a touchdown. I think that it's time that we really need to start talking about CeeDee Lamb in the same conversation as we do Justin Jefferson, as we do Jamar Chase, not just for real life, but for a fantasy asset, especially a dynasty asset, because they have quarterback security. They know that Dak is going to be their quarterback going forward. He has a huge connection with Dak, and he gets better and better every single season. And I think that the sky is the limit for him, especially as he gets more and more comfortable in this system. Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks also scored a touchdown for the Cowboys, which was great to see. But the red zone issues, guys, they kept happening for the Cowboys where they just could not convert. Brandon Aubrey ended up kicking 4 field goals, with his longest being just 38 yards. It was like they hit this magic line, and once they crossed that, they couldn't do anything. It was like the doctor in Field of Dreams, if you guys have seen that, where he crosses off the baseball field and then reverts to his older self. That is kind of how I feel like this Cowboys offense is operated. And that is something that does worry me going forward into the end of the season and potentially in the playoffs, because you cannot not convert in the red zone. You cannot settle for field goals. So that's something that they definitely need to work on, especially in this long week. Steven asks in the chat, hello, Steven. Any idea on Aaron Jones? Is he worth starting if he plays? So far, what I've heard is that he still was not practicing today. So I'm highly doubting that he ends up playing. If he does start, you've got to put him in your lineup. There are too many buys this week. But I just don't think he's going to play, unfortunately. Um, Chad, great to see you in here. Hearing a lot of hype for Chase Brown as a bye week savior with increased usage, but considering how putrid the Mixon-led run game looked, no, I don't think so. I think that you're very desperate if you're playing him in your lineup. So take it with a grain of salt. I know it's tough with bye weeks. My husband and I laughed about some of the people who is forced to play this week. So sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, I'm not a believer. Um, RNG football, the Dak to CD duo has been lethal this year. Yes, it has, and I'm here for it. I'm loving it. We'll answer Ann's question, and then we'll go on into some top news and injury news. So make sure to grab your paper because there is plenty. Ann says, need 2 wide receivers and a flex. Nico, Rasheed, Olave, Deontay, and Zach Moss. So I'm definitely going Nico and Rasheed Rice. I think with Tank Dell and Noah Brown both being questionable, already vaults him up there, but especially with Dalton Schultz probably being out. Rasheed Rice, we'll talk about him a little bit later, why I think that he has huge, huge upside this week. Spoiler alert. And then I think that if Olave plays, we're going to go with him. Zach Moss is going up against the Titans run defense, who has been pretty solid. I know that he can catch passes as well, but they haven't exactly given up that many passes. And then Deontay Johnson showed up on the injury report yesterday, and we don't know what's going on. I have no idea what's happening. So we'll have to keep a close eye on that, along with the fact that he completely just gave up on a couple of plays last Sunday. So we'll have to see what happens there. But Nico, Rasheed, and Olave for me if he plays. Sellers in the chat, what's up? Starting Michael Carter in one league and P Ryan in another. Yeah, you're on the struggle bus, dude. I'm very sorry for you. So let's get into some top news. Von Miller has reportedly turned himself in to the Dallas police on a felony domestic violence warrant. The particular charge is a felony and is punishable by 2 to 10 years in prison. I did, however, hear earlier today that the victim in this case was refusing to cooperate with police. Whether that's a rumor, whether that is just something that, we've not gotten the full scoop on, we don't know, but it's a very unfortunate situation and not something that we want to continue seeing happen in the NFL. Like, there's no place for it here, and I'll just leave it at that. I'm gonna talk about Dak Prescott again because why not? He's a hot topic, right? But after last night's game, Prescott's odds for MVP have jumped massively, and he's now in second place behind Jalen Hurts. The Cowboys obviously need some help to win the division, but you've got to really, really like what you're seeing from him. They just found another way to win, and Dak just keeps stepping up in a really big way. Finally, for the news before we get into injury news, which is lengthy, so be prepared. Patriots owner Robert Kraft spoke out regarding the future of head coach Bill Belichick, with Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated saying that his preference would be for an amicable split. I don't really know if a guy like Bill Belichick would willingly walk away. So Kraft may have to make a tough decision, especially if they lose to this Chargers team that is also on the hot seat as far as their coaching goes. They have underperformed all season long. They have not given Justin Herbert what he needs to succeed. And Brandon Staley's pretty much been on the hot seat for the past couple seasons. So if they can't come away with a win, it's going to be bad news for one of these coaches or the other, maybe both, depending on how bad they play. All right, so let's jump into some injury news. Aaron Jones, like we said, still isn't participating in practice and is questionable to suit up against the Kansas City Chiefs. AJ Dillon was also limited, so I'm really concerned about their run game. You know, you can run against the Kansas City Chiefs. You can't exactly pass on them as much as we want. So if both of these running backs are banged up, it might be hard for Green Bay to get some offense going, especially with how good that defense has been playing as of late for Kansas City. The Texans, as we mentioned, could be in trouble. Both Tank Dell and Noah Brown were limited in practice, and Dalton Schultz didn't practice yet again today. The Broncos defense has also been coming on quite a bit lately, so they need all their weapons, in my opinion, to come away with this win. It's going to be a little bit more difficult when three of your passing options are banged up or unavailable. Speaking of passing options being banged up and unavailable, the Cardinals are also dealing with a ton of injuries. Marquise Brown, Michael Wilson's already been ruled out. Trey McBride was sidelined yesterday but did practice today, so he's expected to play. They say that Marquise Brown is trending in the right direction, which I always hate. It's just so vague and gives us no real information. So he'll likely be a game time decision come Sunday. I don't really know if I want to play him with how his production's been with Kyler Murray back anyway. He's gotten the targets, but he hasn't been able to do anything with them. Panthers wide receiver Jonathan Mingo was also limited in practice due to an Achilles injury. This is new and something that we have not heard of. So it just gets worse for the Panthers. You fire your head coach, you fire your running backs coach, your quarterbacks coach. You're hoping that you'll be able to turn this thing around, especially against a bad Buccaneers defense. And now one of your receiving options is injured. So it just keeps getting worse for the Carolina Panthers. For the Browns, some good news. Myles Garrett is expected to play Sunday. Amari Cooper and Kareem Hunt were limited earlier this week, but quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson remains sidelined in concussion protocol. If he can't go, it's going to be Joe Flacco. We have not seen Joe Flacco play in over a year. We don't really know what he's going to look like, what kind of shape that he's in. It's going to be very interesting to see if this offense changes at all with him in at quarterback. For the Denver Broncos, kicker Will Lutz and wide receiver Jerry Jeudy were limited in practice with a hip and a groin injury. Not so much big news there, but if you do have Will Lutz, he has been scoring a ton of kicker points. So just be on the lookout that you may need a backup kicker if you are rostering Lutz. Colts running back Jonathan Taylor is, of course, doubtful, which I don't know why they wouldn't rule him out. I think they actually did just before I came on the show, thankfully. So we don't have to worry about that situation. Travis Etienne for the Jaguars was also limited in practice due to a chest and a rib injury suffered in week 12. Jerick McKinnon resumed practice in a limited fashion Thursday for the Chiefs. Now, a big one. Keenan Allen for the Chargers didn't practice Thursday due to a groin injury. This is not great news, not practicing late in the week. If they don't practice on Wednesday, it's like, okay, fine, it's a veteran rest day. If they don't practice at all on a Thursday, that's something to be concerned about. They don't have any other real receiving options. Quentin Johnston is disappointed massively. If he is out and it's left to guys like Johnston, it's going to be just not a great day for the Chargers. There are also a lot of questionables for the Dolphins, including running back Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, and tight end Durham Smythe. The news is that Tyreek Hill is going to play, that it's an ankle that he played through last week. Achane should be playing. That's the hope and the idea, but we'll have to wait until he's activated. Coming back off IR and then immediately re-injuring your knee is not always a great sign. And I think Mostert is likely just due to more of a veteran rest situation. And nobody's playing Smythe anyway. Demario Douglas was also limited in practice. And Ezekiel Elliott, they're still questionable for the Patriots. Rashid Shaheed did not practice on Thursday, and Chris Olave was limited. He did practice, but with concussion protocol, you're still allowed to practice. So we don't yet know if he's going to suit up or not. Finally, getting to a couple last ones here. Breece Hall was limited in practice Thursday. A.J. Brown and Julio Jones were limited for the Eagles, with Dallas Goedert still sitting out. No big surprise there, but that A.J. Brown injury is of some concern. And then finally, Chris Godwin for the Bucs was added to the injury report late in the week with a neck issue. Again, not something great that you want to see being added late in the week and not practicing, especially with Baker Mayfield kind of dealing with that ankle injury as well. So let's answer a couple of Chad's questions. With the concerning Charbonnet report, should we jump on DJ Dallas or just ignore it since we know what a start from him looks like? I think it all depends on what you've got going on, how your roster looks. If you're trying to make, defensive plays, I wouldn't really make a defensive play with DJ Dallas. It would be more of a desperation start for me. But if you need him, yeah, anybody who's getting touches, you've got to consider at this point in the season. And then Chad says, if you're saying you want him to quit, is it really amicable? No, totally not. It's just, he has a very good PR team by making that statement. So I see a bunch of you guys in here in the chat that I see in the Bettercast app, but I also see a bunch of you who I have not yet seen. And my question to you guys is, what are you waiting for? It is so much fun to answer questions, to win tickets, to chat with everybody in the community about the games that are going on. And we've got Bettercast going on for not only NFL, we've got it going for NBA, for hockey. We've got trivia, all kinds of fun things that you can just interact with this community for. And it's totally free. And you can win prizes. So what are you waiting for? If you scan that QR code on your screen or go to the Apple app and Google Play stores to download it, you can jump right in and get started with us this week. And I can't wait to see you in there Sunday night. I don't know when the next Bendercast is going to be, but that is always also a great time. So yeah, download it. It's easy. It's right there on your screen. Just do it. All right, we're going to take a real quick break here, but coming back, we're going to get into some stardom sit-ems, continue answering all of your questions, and get into some bold predictions and sleeper picks when we come back.
From the Hometown Hero series, Zach Parise.
That is a very nice card, and that's one I'll probably have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. I mean, Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done.
There we go. The first card for card trade on Rip and Riff history. And it was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because, you know why? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like, we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and, like, take the other one over the barrel. So there you go. In a penny sleeve. Hometown hero, Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
Welcome back into Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I hope you guys have all of your start-sit questions ready and in the chamber, because week 13 is the second coming of the bipocalypse. There are 6 teams on bye, and they're not just your run-of-the-mill average teams. They are the Bills, the Ravens, all kinds of teams who have incredible heavy hitters on them. So you're really going to have to make the right decisions, especially just 2 weeks out from the fantasy playoffs. And I always like to start this segment by going into our accountability check. I wasn't on last Friday. I was unfortunately under the weather, which is why I still have a little Rudolph nose, even right now. But so let's talk about some of the hits and misses from week 11. So a hit was to start Brock Purdy. He ended up as the QB2 with 26.7 fantasy points. Looked absolutely great. Although last week didn't look that great because the game turned into a run game. Spoiler alert, we've got some high projections for him this week. Another hit was to start Brian Robinson, RB7 in PPR formats with 20.2 fantasy points. Another great guy who is kind of game script dependent, but in that situation, and as long as he keeps getting some targets out of the backfield, he's looking like a steady play. Another hit was Tank Dell, wide receiver 3 in PPR formats with 28.9 fantasy points. What can you say bad about Tank Dell? This rookie has just exploded onto the scene and looks absolutely incredible. I hope that he can play this week. Otherwise, it's going to be the Nico Collins show, baby. A miss, unfortunately, was to start Deontay Johnston. I just wrote eek because it was horrible. This is what led to Matt Canada's firing. That entire Steelers offense was awful, but especially Johnson, 3.6 PPR points. And then another miss was to sit Pacheco against the Eagles. He ended up RB23 in PPR formats with 10.1 fantasy points. And yeah, it wasn't the greatest performance, but he was still able to get something going, much more than I thought, against the Eagles. So to start out our startums, and I see your questions, I'll get to them in between the startums and situms, so just hang tight. But my first stardom is Sam Howell, Washington Commanders versus the Miami Dolphins. If you would have told me in week 1 that Sam Howell was going to have 8 games this season where he has finished as a QB1, I would have called you a dirty liar. But that's where we are at this point in the year. He may not be the most efficient guy, but when you're throwing the ball as much as he has, the law of averages tells you that you're just going to put some points and get some payoff. The Dolphins are also a little bit banged up on their defense with Bradley Chubb and safety Javon Holland questionable. And Howell is averaging 40.5 passing attempts on the year and 44.3 over the past 3 weeks, all of which he is finished as a QB1. So it may not be pretty, but he should be able to produce even in a negative game script situation against a tougher defense. Again, that law of averages, we just love it. Next up, I've got Jaylen Warren, the running back from Pittsburgh Steelers, going up against the Cardinals. And honestly, we could do a twofer here. We could add Warren and Najee Harris because I think that they both have value, but I'm leaning Warren over Harris because of that pass catching ability. And yes, he did have a down week last week with that unfortunate fumble. It was Najee Harris who lit up the scoreboard, but Warren still basically got 50-50 of the snaps, and he was utilized in that passing game. And the Cardinals defense has just been completely horrible against the run, ranking 30th in rush DVOA, and they've given up the second most fantasy points to the position. So even in a split backfield situation, there should be plenty of opportunity for Warren to score and return value. Next up, I'm looking at Rachaad White for the Tampa Bay Bucks versus the Panthers. And White has been a pretty decent option throughout the season with his receiving ability, but he may just be able to get this done on the ground this week as well, because the Panthers' run defense is not great. And when I say not great, that's being very charitable. They've given up the third most fantasy points to the running back position. And with Baker Mayfield and Chris Godwin dealing with some injuries, I think that you can expect them to attack on the ground. Plus, again, he does have that receiving upside, and we love that in our running backs. Go moving to wide receivers, Rashee Rice, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Green Bay Packers at Green Bay. Last week, Rice finished as the wide receiver 3 overall in PPR leagues, and he is really emerging as the Chiefs wide receiver 1. I know that Justin Watson had that 11 target game a couple of weeks ago. I think that that was a fluke. I don't think that that is going to be the norm. And with Rice working out of the slot, he will be facing Keyshawn Nixon. And according to PFF, he's allowed 316 receiving yards from the slot, which is the 7th most among cornerbacks this season. And he's also allowed the 2nd most receptions at 38. So Rice's explosive ability is just begging to be released in this matchup, and I cannot wait to see him go off. I love seeing rookies succeed, especially late in the season. My other wide receiver is Christian Kirk, the Jaguars versus the Cincinnati Bengals. And last week, I liked Calvin Ridley over Christian Kirk. But if you read my matchup previews over at fantasyalarm.com, which you can get as part of the All Pro package, by the way, I explained in the matchup previews last week that Calvin Ridley is very good against zone and Christian Kirk is very good against man coverage. The Bengals play an above rate of man coverage, and this is where Kirk thrives. And I mean thrives. He averages 2.25 fantasy points per target against man coverage, which is ranked 8th among all wide receivers. And with a 22.8% target share, he's got a ton of upside, especially if that run game is a little bit inhibited with Travis Etienne banked up. Finally, for the tight ends, Pat Freiermuth at the Cardinals. I just want to say it's amazing what you can do when you start targeting your best players, right? The Steelers finally got 400 yards of offense the last game, and it was largely in part due to Freiermuth's usage. The Cardinals haven't allowed a ton of fantasy points to the tight end, but they do rank 26th in DVOA. So I think that you can count on him yet again. If people got tired of him and dropped him on your waivers and you scooped him up, all I have to say is congratulations. So there are our stardoms. Let's jump into some of these questions before we move to the sits. Anne asks, need one in PPR, Zeke, Miles, and Elijah Moore. Could pick up Juwan, Robert Woods, Perry, Chig, or Higbee. Yeah, that's tough. This is the time of the season where it does get really, really tough. I think I would go with Elijah Moore maybe, but I still don't feel great about that with the uncertainty at quarterback. I don't know how Flacco's going to air it out, but with Amari Cooper banged up, I think that Moore could see an increase in targets. So that's where I'm leaning. If Olave is ruled out, though, I think that I would pick up Juwan Johnson. So just keep that in your back pocket and keep that in mind as kind of a pivot play in case we find out some news that goes wrong with the Browns quarterback situation. Brad's in the chat, full PPR, need 2 if Olave is out. Garrett Wilson, Kirk, Josh Downs, or Godwin. So I am actually going to lean Kirk and Downs. I know Garrett Wilson had that touchdown last week in garbage time. I know that he had a decent week on the box score in the stat line, but with Tim Boyle at quarterback, I can't trust him. I don't think that his floor is very safe. His upside is pretty much non-existent, whereas you've got Kirk going up against that man coverage that we just talked about, and Josh Downs going up against the Tennessee Titans and their pass funnel defense. So those are my two. I don't, yeah, I hate having to bench Garrett Wilson, but that's unfortunately where we are right now. Anne asks Stroud or Herbert, Trevor or Sam. So I am going to go with, hmm, this is a tough one. I think I am going to go with Herbert right now. But if we get more news on Keenan Allen being out, then I'm going to pivot to Stroud. Because if that big pass catching option is removed from the equation, it's just going to be an ugly, ugly day. Trevor or Sam, I think I am leaning Trevor Lawrence. He's just had incredible, incredible upside lately. And I have that same issue in one of the leagues that I'm in, but he's just had such a good 2 weeks that he'll still be able to get it done and have a much higher ceiling than Hal, who you're just hoping to, a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while situation. Um, Chad says, so I'm a big fan of Brevin Jordan normally. He's a great prop bet guy, but with Dell limited, could the defense just zero in on Jordan and Collins, or am I overthinking and just trust the great matchup? I think you can just trust the great matchup. The Broncos have not been good against the tight end all season long. I think that with Dell practicing that he is going to come back in, and with Schultz out, like, let's just play this matchup. I don't think that those lines are going to be very high for his receptions or his yardage. So yeah, I wouldn't overthink that too much. And then finally, Ann asks, in FFPC, need one, Rondale Moore, Atwell, Conklin, Higbee, tight end premium. So the tight end premium situation is something that does pique my interest. However, I think that Higbee is a trap this week. I think that everyone is point chasing after he got those 2 touchdowns last week, but I think that that was very fluky. I'm actually, I think, going to go with Atwell here. Don't feel great about any of it. If Marquise Brown does not go, however, I might pivot to Moore. So it's I feel bad I'm not answering any of these questions definitively, but we don't know until we get all of this information. It's like the Big Lebowski, right? I've got information, man, and that's what we have to wait on until we make these decisions. But that's where I'm leaning from the get-go. So let's move on to the sit-ems for this week. And my first guy is quarterback Baker Mayfield. He's had a rough couple of weeks, to be honest. He only scored 11.3 and 14.4 fantasy points the last 2 games, and he's not got the best matchup this week either. The Panthers have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position, and with that exploitable run defense and Baker already dealing with an ankle injury, I think that they just run the ball consistently. I really don't see a lot of passing upside here from Baker Mayfield. Next up, and this may be a little controversial, but just hear me out. Breece Hall, New York Jets versus the Falcons. With Tim Boyle in at quarterback and all the issues on the Jets offensive line, Hall really hasn't produced at that elite level as of late. And to make things worse, this matchup against the Falcons is not that great. They've allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to the position. It does, however, help that he gets some checkdowns. So obviously, if you don't have another option, you're going to start him, but I don't think the ceiling is there for him anymore. If you're trying to make a decision between him and somebody else on your roster, I think that I may bench him this week. Another guy that I'm looking at potentially benching this week, depending on the status of Cleveland, and I keep going back to that, but we just need to know more about what's going on, is Jerome Ford against the Rams. When the Browns get game scripted out, they do go away from the run game, and that's what happened last week. Ford only had 9 carries and 7 targets out of his 51 snaps, and the uncertainty at quarterback makes me more nervous about his role this week. I will say that Joe Flacco does tend to target the running back quite a bit. At least that's what we saw the last time he played. But I think that he may look more downfield in this matchup. And if they are behind to the Rams, especially with Kieran Williams back and crushing it, I think that Ford could be phased out. And to answer Uncle Ted in the chat, so I'm saying Baker crushes and Breece Hall struggles. No, this is the sit-em segment. This is saying that they both struggle. So let's move on to our wide receivers. The first one I have is Christian Watson versus the Chiefs. And we got a good week from Watson last week in that matchup against the Lions. The very first play of the game went for like 60 yards. And of course, I missed it because I was in the kitchen cooking, but I don't think that he has the same success against L'Jarius Sneed. And the way that the Chiefs were able to shut down A.J. Brown, I just think that he gets phased out. The Chiefs also rank fourth in DVOA versus the wide receiver one and third in pass DVOA. Plus, it's a night game in Lambeau in December. I just don't think that I really want a piece of this. My other wide receiver is Drake London going up against the Jets. This is another guy who had a great week last week, but just isn't really in the best place to repeat. The Jets defense, especially their secondary with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, is just going to be way too much. PFF actually has the outside matchups rated at 26.7 and 23.4 out of 100. So I would stay away from this matchup if you can. Another guy finishing up here is Kyle Pitts of the Falcons, again, going up against the Jets. This isn't so much about the matchup as it is the usage, but he's just not seeing the targets. It's so infuriating as a Kyle Pitts truther. You know his talent, you know that he's a unicorn, but Arthur Smith just refuses to utilize him. And, the Kyle Pitts dream may officially be dead, unfortunately. Let's move on to some favorite sneaky cheapies of this week 13 matchup in DFS. And in week 11, we actually had a pretty decent day. They were Brock Purdy, Devin Singletary, Jaden Reed, and Daniel Bellinger, who had 26.7, 22.8, 19.2, and then 6.8. We were pretty spot on overall with most of the picks, but unfortunately, Bellinger just couldn't get it done. That's, I think, something, though, that you're going to see with a lot of these discount tight ends. But with that said, let's move on to this week. And shocker, surprise, we have Brock Purdy going against the Eagles again. He's only salaried at $6,100, and this game should be very back and forth. And Purdy has such a good matchup. The Eagles have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. And with as stout as their run defense is, the 49ers aren't just going to be able to put it on the back of Christian McCaffrey like they were last week. They're going to have to pass. He has weapons. He can move the ball around. I think this is going to be a very, very good game for him in the game of the week and potentially a rematch or a Super Bowl NFC championship preview that we unfortunately got robbed of last year when Brock Purdy went out with that elbow injury. Next up, I'm going with Jaylen Warren. I said it earlier and we touched on him as a start, but this is just such a great matchup for him. He still feels way too cheap for the upside he offers, as he has had 20-plus point games in 2 of the last 3 weeks. And there's still plenty of work to go around for both these running backs. So I wouldn't be opposed to Najee Harris either. I just like Warren marginally more because of his receiving upside. Going with the wide receivers, I'm dipping way in the Goodwill bin and going A.T. Perry against the Lions. This is purely a dart throw, but he did show up in the waiver wire article this week over on fantasyalarm.com, and it's mainly due to the injuries to Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. Last week, Perry also played 53 of the 72 offensive snaps, leading all receivers, and although he only saw 2 targets, with another week of practice under his belt, I really do expect this role to increase. The Lions defense has also crumbled, so I like this matchup a lot. For my tight end, I am going with Juwan Johnson, 3,400. For much of the same reason, I like A.T. Perry. I like Juwan Johnson. Admittedly, you're not finding solid plays in this price range, especially with 6 teams on a bye. They are kind of all dart throws, but with 2 of their receivers out, he could see an increased role. And I am going to do an honorable mention since we found out earlier that Dalton Schultz did not practice yet again today. Brevin Jordan versus the Broncos. Going back to that question from earlier, don't overthink it. Min price, that's what we're doing here with Brevin Jordan. If he can get the targets, I think he has a ton of upside going into this week. Let's jump into a couple of these questions. Then we'll take a break before going into our bold predictions. And I want to make sure to hear yours in the chat because this is always one of my favorite parts of the show. But Anne asks if Keenan sits Algier or Dubs in PPR. I actually really like Romeo Dubs this week with Christian Watson probably being shadowed by Sneed, with Jaden Reed being banged up all week. Luke Musgrave on injured reserve. I think that Dubs has a bounce back week. I know that he's been a little bit disappointing over the past few 2 or 3 weeks, but it should be a good spot for him this week. And then Chad with Levante and Whiteout and Mingo's injury, is Ian Thomas worth a gamble at a barren position? I find it hard to trust anybody on the Carolina offense outside of Adam Thielen, and even he hasn't been trustworthy in recent weeks. Um, he could be, but I'm just not willing to take that gamble. I don't like the risk that it offers versus the reward that it offers, if that makes sense. All right, so we're going to take one more break. When we come back, we are going to jump into week 13 bold predictions, as well as get some of our sleeper picks in for this Sunday slate. We'll be right back in a couple minutes. Stay tuned.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coop A Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my roommate and good friend who got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there. NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one, the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94 for the Sega Genesis, right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
Now let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called the VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta that didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
And then you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
Welcome back, y'all. This is the final part of the show. How fast an hour flies when you're having fun. Thank you guys so much for joining me in the chat. I always love talking football with y'all. So let's jump into some of these bold predictions. And we've already got a couple in the chat, but if you've got one, make sure to throw it in there. So let's go through a few of mine first off to start, and then I'll put yours up there because it's fun going bold, right? Just going with your gut, going with the vibe of what's going to happen this week. And the first vibe that I have is that Derrick Henry scores 2 touchdowns for his second week in a row. Yes, I know that Derrick Henry's been disappointing this season, that he's regressed, that maybe age has caught up with him. But with the sudden release of linebacker Shaquille Leonard and Grover Stewart still serving his suspension, the Colts' run defense is very, very exploitable. They're currently allowing an average of 1.4 rushing touchdowns per game, and Henry looked good last week, seeing 76 yards on the ground and those 2 touchdowns against the Panthers. So I think he can repeat that this week. Next up, I've got Devontae Smith going for 7 receptions, but 100 plus yards and a touchdown. Now, we've talked about this game, that we think that it's going to be back and forth, but A.J. Brown has been pretty much shut down the past 2 weeks. And now Devonta Smith is emerging as the wide receiver 1 in these situations. Now with Brown dealing with a thigh injury that is kept him limited in practice this week, I think that Smith is set up for another big day. The Niners kind of rank middle of the pack when it comes to wide receiver fantasy points, as opposed to other positions where they rank one of the best across the board. So you can throw on them. And with all the trash talk that has gone on between the 49ers and the Eagles, it's going to be a great game. Just in case you guys don't know, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but Deebo Samuel apparently said something after the NFC Championship game last year that they were only playing with 10 men on the field. Then he kind of doubled down on it, saying that cornerback James Bradbury was trash. When asked about it earlier this week, he said that he doesn't regret anything that he said. So that is good locker room material for the Philadelphia Eagles. They have fired back. It's honestly been very entertaining to watch, and I think it's going to be a very entertaining game, partially courtesy to Devonta Smith. Next up, I think that Quentin Johnston has a breakout game against the Patriots defense. He has been disappointing this season. He is not the wide receiver that we thought was that first round talent. He's had a couple drops, but there is never a bigger time than now to have a breakout game. Keenan Allen is dealing with that quad injury that has kept him out of practice all week. And even if he does play, if he's limited, some of those targets could go Johnston's way. There's still no Joshua Palmer. So just by volume alone, he should be set up for a good day. The Patriots also give up the 10th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So everything is aligning for a good fantasy day. And, Staley's job may depend on it. If they come out flat, there's not much hope left for Brandon Staley. Finally, I think that Sam Laporta is going to finish as the tight end 1 this week against a tough Saints defense. And I know that on paper, it looks like the Saints have a really good defense against the tight end, but having Marshawn Lattimore out of the lineup really impacts this defense. The Saints have had to move pieces around to make up for this loss in coverage, and I think that this is going to open up the middle for Laporta. If Amon-Ra St. Brown also lines up out wide on a couple of the snaps that he gets, Laporta is also going to slide in to the slot where he will be facing, drumroll please, Alontae Taylor, which we'll just say is a very favorable matchup. Alontae Taylor ranks in the 170s out of 200 in defensive grade in coverage, so just not a great look. And also, I just want to kick this rookie tight end narrative to the curb and get ready for Laporta to have a good day. After this season and after the year that he has had, we can't say anymore that rookie tight ends aren't good for fantasy, because Laporta is showing us that they are, and they can be. So Chad has a bold prediction. Betting Tim Boyle pass yards overs, including all 3 alt lines, is printing money. He was better than expected versus a not easy Dolphins defense, and now gets a significantly easier Falcons defense. I'm not sold on Tim Boyle. I look at his matchups historically and what he's produced historically, and it just hasn't looked that great. I'm also worried if Mekhi Becton doesn't play that he gets pressured quite a bit, but we never know. And that's the beauty of football. I love that call. Ann says that Russ throws for 3 touchdowns. Listen, I like where you're going with this. We have definitely seen Russell Wilson get more and more comfortable. It's not the same narrative as we had last year where, we were counting to see the bathrooms in his home versus how many touchdowns he threw, and it took him almost all year. So I love to see that. Michael says bold indeed, and then jumps in and says Achane is playing. Somebody dropped Achane in one of the leagues that I'm in after he came back from IR, and I was somehow lucky enough to scoop him up. So this news could not make me happier right now. I am so excited for him to play, especially against that Washington Commanders defense that has just been a sieve against the run. That's great news. Great to hear. I think that Mostert and Achane can both have fantasy viable days. I don't think that having one in phases out the other. Now, if you did pick up Jeff Wilson earlier in the week, he might be faded out a little bit, unfortunately. And there just aren't a lot of options on the waiver wire for running backs if that's the case. But, it's the time of the year where injuries are prevalent and all over the place. So continue throwing your questions in the chat. But if you're new here, even if you're not, you know that we do have a brand new partner here on Britt's Fantasy Blitz, and you know them, you love them. It is our friends over at Sleeper. I'm sure that you house a lot of your leagues in Sleeper on their platform, but now there is so much more to enjoy with their new Sleeper picks. You can choose 2 or more players. You can multiply your entry up to 100 times. You just choose 2 or more players, multiply your entry, choose from NFL, NBA, college sports. And, if your fantasy season is in the toilet, there are also single week drafts that you can enter to keep your fantasy season going. To sign up, scan that QR code on the screen or go to Sleeper on your mobile device, use promo code VAULT3, and new users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. So let's get into some of these right here. That QR code is just super convenient. You're already here. Just scan it. They're giving you a free $100. What's better than free money? So let's jump into some of these picks that I really like for Sunday. The first one being Desmond Ridder, more than 0.5 interceptions at a 1.58 times multiplier. I typically really don't like to play interception stats since they can be hit or miss, but in this matchup, I really can't get away from it. He's thrown 8 interceptions in the 10 games he's played this year, and going up against this Jets defense, I think sets him up for failure. The Jets rank 3rd in the NFL with interceptions per game at 1.1. And if Ridder does try to tempt fate against Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, it just may not go very well for him. So I'm going more than 0.5 interceptions. I'm also going with Breece Hall more than 3.5 receptions at 1.6 times. And remember earlier in the stardom section where I was like, yeah, he gets dump offs. That's the only fantasy viability or saving grace that he has right now. That's why I'm looking at this stat. He's had 12 receptions over the last 2 games. He saw 9 targets in week 12. I know that the Falcons defense has been good at containing the running back, but I think that target volume alone should line him up to see a few or more receptions this week. Next up, I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, more than 81.5 receiving yards. Slot receiver, meet bad slot corner. And I hate to keep harping on Alontae Taylor, but this matchup is just so juicy by itself. Anyone who faces against Alontae Taylor looks really good. And then you have the fact that St. Brown is one of the best in the league. He has hit this mark in 7 out of the 10 games that he's played so far this year. And I really think it continues this week, even on the road in a hostile environment. Next up, I've got Rachaad White, more than 62.5 rushing yards, 1.77 times. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but the Carolina Panthers are just so easy to run against that this may be a smash play. The Panthers are allowing 124.9 rushing yards per game, and with White playing 87% of the offensive snaps, all or most of that volume should go to him. I think that he has a great day, not only rushing, but also in the receiving game. Finally, I'm looking at Austin Eckler, more than 3.5 receptions, 1.54 times multiplier. With Keenan Allen banged up, with Quentin Johnston not doing a ton as of yet, we'll see if that bold prediction comes true. Justin Herbert could look to Eckler a lot more than he has recently. And Eckler has hit this mark in 5 of the 8 games that he's played this year, with the Patriots averaging 4.82 receptions per game to the running back position. I think a pass catching specialist like Eckler should have no trouble hitting this mark. So there are my top 5 favorite sleeper picks of the week. If you play them all, it's a 12.3 times multiplier. So again, to get signed up for Sleeper and make your first deposit, go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper on your mobile device. Use promo code VAULT3, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Michael just says they just moved Ridder to 1.38 times. Yeah, this is what happens. People sniff out something and then get on it, and those stats can move up and down just a little bit. So these may not be completely accurate because I did do these this morning. If somebody else has gone on there and sniffed out the same thing I'm sniffing, it could be a little bit different, but it's pretty similar. We don't technically see or typically see a lot of movement. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. I cannot believe that it's already been an hour. And I'll just say it again for everyone who joined late. If you haven't downloaded the BetterCast app, what are you waiting for? There are a ton of us always in there. You can play for free, answer questions. You win tickets when you win that you can redeem for real NFL merch, NBA merch, things like that. Use that QR code. Again, super easy. You don't even have to put any effort to it. Just scan that QR code, go to the Apple app or Google Play Store to download it today, and join in all the fun. I cannot wait for the next vendor cast that happens. We've also got the All Pro subscription over at fantasyalarm.com. You can go to fantasyalarm.com/win, scan that QR code, use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment. And this will get you in all of the matchup previews that I keep talking about. We'll get you that. We'll get you the lineup generator, all of our sports content, all of our DFS content, everything that we have to offer is part of that package. So scan that code and come be a member of the family. We always have arms open to new families. So that's going to do it for us today. Coming up next on the Better Sports Network and Fantasy Alarm YouTube is the Better Sports Betting Show with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, followed from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, the NBA DFS Live Show with John Impemba and James Grande. We will also be around on Sunday morning. We are switching it up a little bit. It will be John Impemba and Coop at 9 a.m. Eastern on this same channel, Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper on Sirius XM at 10 a.m. Eastern. And then John Impemba and myself close it all out in the later window at 11 a.m. Eastern. So make sure to join us there and we will answer your last minute questions. Also, make sure to check up the Sleeper Picks article over on Fantasy Alarm coming out every day for NFL and NBA. We've got a lot of great picks for you going on over there. Really appreciate everybody going on in the chat. Let me answer this one final question from Anne. Strategy question. If you like the over on a reception prop at 3.5, but it's now at 4, I think if it goes to 4, you can still play it because you'll get that push, even if it does just hit that 4. If it goes up an entire point, though, that does change my outlook on what I'm thinking. And then Chad, we got to be nice to Bender. We got to be nice to Howard. Howard's a big old teddy bear, and he looks great. He looks great. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I will see you again on Monday. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Go crush those matchups. Make that final playoff push. Have a great weekend. And as always, thanks for getting blitzed.